Okay, welcome everybody to the inaugural seminar of the Science Fiction Research Group here at Deakin University. Don't worry too much about the Deakin University bit, that's just where we're located geographically in space and time. We're hoping that the group and the activities of the group will expand exponentially outside of this throbbing nano centre of Deakin University. Throbbing nano centre, represented in this case, unfortunately, just by the Phoenix Gallery. The unsigned and unknown and unknowable Phoenix Gallery, as it turns out. So, it's my pleasure to begin by introducing our two presenters tonight. We have Paul Thomas, who's standing here, and we have Tracy Sudoff. Both of whom are visual artists, thinkers, creators, who have an investment in, broadly speaking, science fiction or speculative fiction ideas and their own work, their own creative works. We've worked out an order. It took us a long time to work out the order of presentation, and Paul's going first. Paul Thomas is head of painting at the College of Fine Arts in New South Wales. He's also associate head of school, but there's much more to Paul than that. Paul's had a long and prestigious association with the visual arts here in Australia. Some of you will, no doubt, I hope, know that Paul was the initiator of the Biennale Electronic Arts in Perth for many years. Paul's had a long-standing commitment to media arts in Australia and has an international footprint in terms of the people that he works with and encourages in this manner. But Paul's going to talk about his own work tonight. And I'll introduce Tracy, because I've talked too much already when it's her time. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Leon for inviting me down here, and thank you all for turning up. I'm going to try and go through a lot of things that I've been involved in, but mostly since 2002. But I wanted to show you that one image just at the start, pre-2002, which is me measuring Perth in 1980 or something to see if it measured up.
But it's something we're not sure about really in the end, is it?
Yeah. But and if you want to shout out at any time, please feel free to do so. But what it's the reason that it's there also is because of space and measurement, and the ability to define measurement. So I'm going to just amble through this, and if you have any questions, don't ask them because I most probably won't be able to answer. So I'm coming down to science fiction, and of course it's like coming to a science fiction group and not being a science fiction necessarily person. Bringing this image is most probably bringing coals to Newcastle type of thing, even though it's Burwood. So coals to Burwood. But this is the start of where I'm going to begin. This is, and again, jump in and correct me because it's not my field. But this is from the 1942 novella by Robert Heinlein. Heinlein, thank you. That person in the audience keeps on speaking. This is about Waldo, and the reason it's being used in this context is because this was an idea that it had in whenever I said 42, about the ability to manipulate small space. So this guy wants to sort of work on a cellular level. So he builds a machine and tools to work on this micro dissection. So he devised a Waldo, which is these sort of robotic arms that he can put on his hands that then build smaller arms, and they build smaller arms, and so on and so forth until you get down to a molecular level. So a theorist that I met called Colin Milburn, has been writing about art and science fiction. So if you want to get somebody from UC Davis who's really smart, then he's really smart. He makes a relationship to Feynman, Richard Feynman, who in 1959 gave the paper There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom, which is fascinating, and I'll just read you a little bit of that. So now I want to build much the same device, a master-slave system which operates electrically, but I want the slaves to be made especially carefully by modern, large-scale machinists, so that they are 1/4 the scale of the hands that are ordinarily maneuver. So you have a scheme by which you can do things at 1/4 scale anyway. The little servo motors with little hands play with little nuts and bolts. They drill little holes. They are 4 times smaller. So I manufacture a quarter-size lathe. I manufacture quarter-size tools. I make it at the 1/4 scale. Still another set of hands, again relatively 1/4 size. So here's Richard Feynman from that paper talking about how he would then develop the idea of how we could get down to a molecular level through this example of the hands, which Colin Milburn suggests is directly from this Waldo paper. Now, that paper is seminal in relationship to the huge amount of research that's gone into nanotechnology since. In other words, it seemed to make it viable. And when I was really young, so a long, long time ago, the idea of getting all the information onto the head of a pin, which is another one, was like, oh my God, this is incredible. The whole of the world's information on the head of a pin. And so the fact that it was Encyclopedia Britannica that he was actually doing is also a very strange notion of a post-colonialist view of that. But anyway, I wanted to start there to sort of suggest that there's a kind of background to this manipulation of atoms and the relationship between that and fiction. And so I want to try and go on to this.
Where'd he go?
Fluctuation on 1.
There's a change in the silicon mass.
It's probably a bird. It'll fly away when we fire it up.
Initiating demolecularization.
But that was, what's his name from Spider-Man 3, being made into a kind of molecular it's coming back together, and the world's going to be a beautiful place after that scream of anxiety. But you all know, of course, of Will McArthur's Bloom, where they talk about notions of a swarm and the idea of a mycora, where the world gets eaten away and ends up being this mycora, which has its resonance with Drexler's Engines of Creation, where he talked about grey goo, and the notion then is that you have these rogue nanoassemblers that then go off, and rather than build the world, they strip these energy things that ties together, and we all sort of turn into this mush, which is a cool idea, which you get criticised by scientists for talking about sometimes, but I think for artists it's still got a real lot of resonance about how we're actually held together and what does this. And I think the Sandman is a kind of cool example of this, because he's like, you know, this whole example of this fits in. And so this is another example of the Bloom, but this is Michael Crichton's Prey, and he's, if you want to think of it, I don't need to read that to you, do you? But you roughly got that we're all a swarm of swarms, we're all part of this relationship, where we're part of a kind of network of vibrations, rhythms and patterns that I've written about a bit about the relationship to that, but we're like a population of oscillators, which is what Deleuze talks about in this. And I find these really interesting ideas in relationship to how we think about the world and so on. And so I wanted to then say how this gets then translated into an art practice, this kind of initial thinking. So I was fascinated in this context about how much of us become part of the world around us.